Welcome back to Spectator Sports, where we cover sports from a spectator's point of view. I'm your host, Sebastian Fonseca. This is episode number 130, and my Eagles are Super Bowl champions, and we're here to recap everything in Super Bowl 59. But before we get into the Super Bowl 59 recap, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. If you're new to Spectator Sports and you want to help this channel grow, reach a broader audience, we're going to need your help. Please drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Additionally, if you want to get clips from today's episode, we got that for you here on YouTube in our various playlists, as well as on TikTok for now. And if you want to enjoy Spectator Sports from an audio perspective, we got that for you too. I'll link everything in the description, and let's get into this Super Bowl 59 recap. The Philadelphia Eagles are Super Bowl champions, delivering a dominating performance against the two-time defending Kansas City Chiefs, denying them the coveted three-peat by a score of 40-22. This was a total demolition. This was belt to ass. This was take them out back, put them out of their misery. This was a complete utter destruction of the Kansas City Chiefs, and the final score of 40-22 is much closer than what the actual game played out to be on Sunday in New Orleans. Vic Fangio's defense set the tone from the jump and shut down the Kansas City offense led by Patrick Mahomes, and this was part of a complete dominating performance where the Eagles got up 24-0 and half, even held a 34-0 score. Particularly, this Philadelphia defense made Patrick Mahomes have a historically bad first half. He took 3 sacks through 2 interceptions, one being a pick six, and had just 33 passing yards at the end of the first half, where 11 of those came on the very first play. This is the offensive sequence for the Kansas City Chiefs. It goes punt, 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 pick six, punt, interception, and another punt. This is completely unheard of for a Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid-led team. And clearly, the offensive line stood no chance against this Eagles defensive front. And while Matt Nagy and the offense focus on shutting down Jalen Carter, who was basically limited to just 2 quarterback hits with various double teams, even holding him at times, this allowed the rest of Vic Fangio's defense to flourish. Guys like Josh Sweat, Milton Williams dominated throughout the entire night. And let's talk about Josh Sweat for a second, because Josh Sweat was in trade talks to start off the 2024 offseason. He's a very streaky player, as many Eagles fans may know. It wasn't the best year in 2023, and many thought that he may not be back because already the Eagles traded away Hassan Reddick, and they thought they would just start anew even with Josh Sweat. But instead, they restructured his deal to a 1-year, $10 million deal. Like I said again, he had a streaky 2024 season. He was quiet at the start, got really hot in the middle part of the year, but then did not have a sack since the beginning of December. But in this Super Bowl, he had the game of his life. 2.5 sacks, and what a phenomenal performance where one of his quarterback hits on Mahomes actually altered the throw, and it was an interception into the waiting arms of first-team All-Pro linebacker Zach Bond. 2 more sacks from Milton Williams and another from Jordan Davis culminated a 6-sack night, and one of them was a strip sack on Patrick Mahomes, and the Eagles' defensive line got after Mahomes early and often. They pressured him 17 times, hit him 11 times, and forced 2 interceptions. This was a Vic Fangio masterpiece. He did not call a single blitz. He got pressure consistently with 4 guys. I know the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may have created the blueprint to stop Patrick Mahomes. They had this phenomenal performance in Super Bowl 55. But this Eagles performance in Super Bowl 59, they took the Bucs blueprint, refined it, and perfected it. Because, like I said, this performance, just getting home with just 4 guys, allowing the rest of your defense to sit back into zone and force guys to beat the zone, where we've seen these pass catches for the Chiefs not do that consistently this season. The defensive backs blanketed the Chiefs receivers as they got 0 separation, and every time Mahomes dropped back in the pocket, there was somebody in his face. Only when his receivers were 2 yards past the line of scrimmage, Mahomes was already stepping up in the pocket, moving off his spot. He never got comfortable in this game. He had the happy feet throughout the entirety of the night. It showed. He was rattled early and often, and he never seemed to get into the flow of the game. There was a series of catastrophic events where Mahomes was sacked twice by Josh Wedd and then a half sack with Josh Wedd and J-Lix Hunt. But it was 3rd down and 16, and Mahomes is rolling out due to pressure and already off his spot. And he just fails to see Cooper DeJean sitting back and cuts off the route, intercepts the ball, and Cooper DeJean does what he does with his return and takes it back for a pick 6 on his birthday in Super Bowl 59. This puts the Eagles up 17-0, and another pick, like I said, from Zach Bond was converted into a touchdown pass from Jalen Hurts to A.J. Brown to go up 24-0 into halftime. To summarize this Chiefs offense in the first half, they were restricted to just 23 yards and only 1 first down in the entirety of the half. Mahomes looked like he was seeing ghosts. In fact, they never even crossed midfield until the end of the 3rd quarter. Vic Fangio has done a great job, especially when the Eagles play on turf. In fact, the Eagles dominated on artificial turf throughout the entirety of the year, only allowing 11.4 points a game. This is when we remember that the Super Bowl that these two teams met up 2 years ago in Super Bowl 57, where Mahomes and the Chiefs offense had their way with a Eagles pass rush that put up 70 sacks in a single season. But remember, that field was oversaturated with water and it was basically a slip and slide, and it took away the Eagles' greatest strength, which was their pass rush. And you could see that Hassan Reddick and the rest of the pass rushers for the Eagles had no traction to provide any type of rush on Patrick Mahomes. In Super Bowl 59, it's in the Caesars Superdome in New Orleans, artificial turf, and Mahomes was under siege throughout the entirety of the night. This was a Vic Fangio masterpiece. And that 0-8 record, you can throw it out the window. It's an afterthought after this dominant performance, where his defense in this entire postseason forced 13 turnovers. Each game they have forced at least 2 turnovers, and they're going up against pretty good quarterbacks. Jordan Love in the wild card round, they went up against Matthew Stafford and Jaden Daniels in the NFC Championship game. And in the Super Bowl, you go up against Patrick Mahomes, who's regarded as the next GOAT, the greatest quarterback of this generation. And throughout this entire game, Mahomes never got comfortable. He was off his mark. He was rushing throws, never got his feet set. And this is a Super Bowl performance to remember, a dominant defensive performance, and credit to Vic Fangio. I mean, this guy has been a coach in the NFL for nearly 40 years, and we've seen him be part of various teams and various defenses with various players, but got close in 2012 with the San Francisco 49ers, but didn't get it done in this very stadium in New Orleans, and kind of ventured around. He eventually got his head coaching gig with the Denver Broncos, didn't really work out, but decided to take a gig with the Miami Dolphins, and many Dolphins players did not like Vic Fangio's coaching style. It was too hard, and for whatever reason, he was fired and cut out from the Miami Dolphins staff, and eventually returned home to Philadelphia, where he has roots. And day one, he talked about what his philosophy was with the defense and how he'd like to implement that with the entire defensive roster, and look at the results. They bought into the scheme. They were so dominant. This is the youngest defense in the entire NFL, and he turned it into the league's top-rated defense, points allowed and total yards. The final stats make this a lot closer than it actually was. There was 2 garbage time touchdowns, but when the game was already out of hand, when the Eagles were up 34-0 at that point. Take a bow, Vic Fangio. I mean, this defense really changed the tide in this game and honestly put on one of the best defensive clinics I've ever seen in a Super Bowl. If you tell me that Saquon Barkley was going to be held to 57 yards rushing on barely 2 yards a carry, I would think that the Eagles got smacked by the Kansas City Chiefs. But the game plan was clear from Steve Spagnuolo and his staff. Just like the Chiefs offense did everything they could to stop Jalen Carter, well, the Chiefs defense did everything they could to take out Saquon Barkley from the game. And from a rushing standpoint, they did. Had probably his quietest day. Didn't do much on the ground. Did a little bit through the air. Had almost over a total of 100 yards from scrimmage, but it was a non-factor in this game, and the Eagles turned to Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts had a masterful performance against Steve Spagnuolo yet again. In Super Bowl 57, he had 3 rushing touchdowns and a passing touchdown, over 370 yards for the game, but that one fumble was the big mistake that translated to a scoop and score in that Super Bowl. Well, in Super Bowl 59, he put on another great performance. Yes, he had the one red zone turnover, but I think that was the only imperfection on basically a perfect night for Jalen Hurts. Every time that Jalen Hurts was dropping back, he made the right read. He found the open guy, whether it was Dallas Goedert or Saquon Barkley out of the backfield or Devontae Smith or A.J. Brown on a cross or whatever it was, Jalen Hurts was there to make the throw. Jalen Hurts, I mean, this has been what a magical run. In the last 2 games, he had 3 rushing touchdowns and a passing touchdown in the NFC Championship game against the Washington Commanders. Silenced the doubters there, but I don't think you can even doubt Jalen Hurts after this Super Bowl performance. Spags threw the kitchen sink and Jalen Hurts, and each time Jalen responded consistently, beating the blitz, finding the open man, whether it was Jahan Dotson, Dallas Goedert, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, or even Saquon Barkley out of the backfield, as Saquon had 40 yards receiving for the day. But even when there was pressure with these blitzes, he stepped up in the pocket and went off for those back-breaking scrambles that we're used to seeing Mahomes make, and Jalen Hurts surpassed his own Super Bowl record of most rushing yards by a quarterback with 72 on the ground in Super Bowl 59. Jalen Hurts had a day. He had nearly 300 total yards and 3 total touchdowns, and his touchdown to Devontae Smith was the dagger to put the Eagles up 34-0, an insurmountable lead even against Patrick Mahomes. With this performance in Super Bowl 59, Jalen Hurts won Super Bowl MVP. Jalen Hurts, going up against Patrick Mahomes in 2 Super Bowls, has simply outperformed him. If you look at this tweet here by Dan Orlovsky, in head-to-head matchups in the Super Bowl with Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts, well, Jalen Hurts has outperformed him. More passing yards, more total yards, more first downs, more touchdowns, and fewer turnovers. In the past 2 years, he's outdueled Mahomes in the Super Bowl. He's beaten every AFC top quarterback, including Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Tua Tagovailoa, and in the NFC, where we've seen some of these other quarterbacks like Matthew Stafford, Jordan Love, Jaden Daniels, well, he beat them all in a playoff run this year. Jalen Hurts deserves his flowers, his respect. And after being benched in the national championship game for Tua and sitting back watching his backup win the national title game, sitting back the next year, letting Tua be the starter, but saving the day in the SEC title game, later transferring to Oklahoma, where Nick Saban said that he would be better as a passer with Lincoln Riley over in Oklahoma, was the Heisman runner-up to Joe Burrow, who had a historic season, and taken in the 2nd round of the 2020 draft when the Eagles recently extended Carson Wentz, and later became the MVP runner-up in 2022, Super Bowl runner-up and later became the MVP runner-up in 2022, lost a heartbreaking Super Bowl 2 seasons ago, endured the epic collapse in 2023, now stands atop of the NFL. Many have questioned Jalen Hurts during his entire career. Well, he continues to perform despite a revolving door of coordinators. In fact, Kellen Moore has recently accepted a job to join the New Orleans Saints to become their head coach. And say what you want about Jalen Hurts, but he's a proven winner, and now he's a Super Bowl champion and Super Bowl MVP. Like in Super Bowl 55, the Chiefs were humiliated. Mahomes was taking a beating for 3 hours, running for his life, making some insane throws against this vicious Buccaneers defense. After seeing Mahomes get hit 10 times and during 3 sacks and throwing 2 interceptions, GM Brett Veach assembled a new offensive line that very offseason. He signed guard Joe Thuney from the New England Patriots in free agency and later drafted center Creed Humphrey in the NFL draft. This solidified the offensive line, which was once a patchwork offensive line for the first two Super Bowl appearances, and this helped translate the Chiefs into a dynasty, winning back-to-back championships in Super Bowl 57 and Super Bowl 58. But in Super Bowl 59, the Chiefs had no answer for the Eagles' tenacious defense. There's no excuse like in Super Bowl 55, where the Chiefs were missing two offensive starters. Mahomes himself was injured. This time everybody was healthy, including Mahomes. Mahomes simply had no time in the pocket. Whenever he dropped back to pass, his receivers were barely 2 yards off the line of scrimmage, and there was a Eagles pass rusher in his face. This game was never close, as it was 24-0 at halftime, and the Chiefs trailed as many as 34-0 at the end of the third quarter. I'm just curious, what were the attempts at making any adjustments from Andy Reid and his staff? I mean, this is one of the greatest head coaches of this generation, especially after Bill Belichick is out of the NFL. It's Andy Reid's league and everybody else is just sitting around, but this is now the second time that he's had a game plan where he did not account for such a tenacious defensive line, and they just simply had no chance to get going. It just seemed like without the guys up front to protect Mahomes, the receivers did run some pretty good routes, but even they couldn't get separation on a consistent basis against this Eagles defensive backs. Now Mahomes drops to 3-2 in Super Bowls, and I think we can pause the GOAT debates compared to Tom Brady. And Tom Brady, who was on the call for Fox Sports, he was part of 3 Super Bowl losses in his historic career, but those 3 losses came by a combined 15 points. Every one of them was a one-possession game. But Patrick Mahomes, when he loses a Super Bowl, he gets throttled, blown out. The 2 Super Bowl losses have been by a -40, and it honestly could have been at least -50 if the Chiefs didn't pick up 2 garbage time touchdowns. This is by far the worst loss of Mahomes' career, and it just goes to show, without protection up front, any quarterback can look mortal in the NFL. So where do the Chiefs go from here? Well, obviously the first thing has to be addressed: offensive line. Offensive guard Trey Smith is likely to leave in free agency, as he's going to chase a bag this year. This also probably opens the door for the Chiefs defense, where Chris Jones is getting older and they need to find another pass rusher outside of George Karlaftis. I think they just cannot depend on those 2 guys to get consistent pressure. I like George Karlaftis. He's a solid D end, but they absolutely need to find a complementary piece that can get consistent pressure. In the secondary, last year they had L'Jarius Sneed paired with Trent McDuffie, and that was a very lethal duo. But Jalen Watson replacing L'Jarius Sneed, who left via trade for a contract extension with the Tennessee Titans, has not lived up to that kind of level where L'Jarius Sneed played for Kansas City. Trent McDuffie can only do so much, and you simply cannot clone an all-pro cornerback. So as long as McDuffie is there, I'm sure he has that side of the field, or wherever his guy is that he's matched up on clamps. But for the most part, that other side opposite of McDuffie is going to be a weak spot in the Chiefs defense. I don't think the Chiefs lost this game due to their defense. I think they did a great job in limiting the offensive player of the year in Saquon Barkley, as he barely had any impact in this game. But the passing defense got lit up on a consistent basis. The running game was non-existent. If you look at the running backs, they combined for 24 yards, and it's just under 3 yards a carry, where Mahomes was the leading rusher yet again in a Super Bowl with 4 carries for 25 yards. Kareem Hunt is a solid back, but he's definitely past his prime, and Isaiah Pacheco, who was missing a great part of this year, hasn't been able to string together a consistent part in the Chiefs' backfield to the point where the Chiefs don't feel like they can have a bell cow back to take some pressure off of Mahomes. Obviously, the offensive line plays a part in this as well, as they could not provide any type of rushing lanes for these Chiefs running backs, but they need to find somebody to help run the rock for the Chiefs. The receiving room is pretty simple. I know that Rashid Rice will be back next season, but the experiment with DeAndre Hopkins and Marquise Brown were not so successful, as Marquise Brown missed a greater part of the season due to an injury, and DeAndre Hopkins simply didn't work out. I mean, that drop he had on that pivotal 3rd and 11 where he had a ton of green grass, and I know Mahomes didn't necessarily put in the most perfect spot. DeAndre Hopkins has been in this league long enough to say that if it's in your catch radius, it's a catchable ball. And he somehow slipped on the play and just never seemed to get going until it was way too late. Obviously, Xavier Worthy is the saving grace, as he had a magnificent performance in garbage time, but still put up a gaudy 8 catches for 157 yards and 2 touchdowns. He can get by anybody on the outside, and I think he could be the Chiefs' next version of Tyreek Hill if they continue to develop his trajectory, but they still have a lot of work to do, because another thing they have to consider is, what is Travis Kelce going to do in his future? He's been mulling retirement and did not look the greatest this year, with the exception of a handful of games where he looked like the old Travis Kelce. But with his focus being more about the podcasting space and also with his girlfriend Taylor Swift, well, I don't know where his priorities may lie, and I think at this point you got to think about a world without Travis Kelce for the Kansas City Chiefs. And then if you look at the entire AFC landscape, let's just start off with the division. The LA Chargers have finally found their head coach in Jim Harbaugh, and they have a young quarterback in Justin Herbert. The Denver Broncos have Sean Payton, and they seem to have their quarterback of the future in Bo Nix. Those are 2 viable threats who both made the postseason this year, are only going to get better, and I think they absolutely have a shot to take a bite into the Chiefs' armor next season. In the AFC as a whole, I mean, you still have Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, who are bound to finally break through this Chiefs blockade at some point, right? I mean, they're knocking on the door, and there's only so many times that they're going to get the door slammed in their face. And Joe Burrow, who does have that playoff win against Patrick Mahomes, doesn't seem to be scared, is going to have a retooled defense, and as long as the front office provides him with the surrounding cast and locks up T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, I think they have a lethal offense that can contend with the Chiefs as well. Another thing to remember is Mahomes will be 30 by the start of the 2025 season, and Andy Reid will be entering the back end of his 60s, so time is absolutely limited for these Chiefs. I mean, I'm not saying the dynasty is over, but there is potential, but they definitely won't have a grip hold of this conference like they used to have for the last 7 years. And I think this blueprint that the Eagles have laid out, where many teams now, I think in free agency and the upcoming draft, are going to focus on the defense, because if you can get pressure on Mahomes and also not take players away from this roster, I think this might be a case where the Chiefs have to make some adjustments on their roster, on the coaching staff, if they want to extend their dynasty. A kind of under the radar story that was in Super Bowl 59 leading up to it was Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz was the Eagles' former franchise quarterback, was a big reason why the Eagles won their first championship in 2017. But injury struck where he tore his ACL at the later part of the regular season. Nick Foles was put in, and the rest is history. Eagles win Super Bowl 52, but Carson Wentz retook the reins in 2018, but yet again got hurt with a back injury, and this was already when he signed an extension with the Eagles after his rookie deal would end. And in 2018, Nick Foles came in yet again to save the day and help the Eagles get into the playoffs and even win another playoff game, with Carson Wentz shelved for the rest of the year. In 2019, Wentz finally played all 16 games in the regular season, winning the NFC East. But in a cruel twist of fate, in his playoff debut 4 years into his career, he suffered a concussion early in the first quarter and was ruled out. Didn't suit up for the rest of the game. In the 2020 draft, Howie Roseman noticed a troubling trend. His franchise quarterback was never available for the postseason. And in the second round, Howie Roseman drafted Jalen Hurts. This move paid to be a huge one for Carson Wentz and his psyche, because in 2020, albeit in a pandemic year under historic circumstances, Wentz caved. He led the league in interception and eventually was benched for Jalen Hurts for the rest of the season. Many reports broke out that Wentz went rogue, where at the line he would ignore head coach Doug Peterson's play calls and just audible calls at the line and throw routes for his buddy Zach Ertz. We would see this on a consistent basis where Wentz would be kind of unhinged and his fundamentals, and we'd see a ton of interceptions and a lot of hero ball after sustaining a ton of injuries, especially to his lower body and even his back. After Doug Peterson was fired in the 2021 offseason, Nick Siranni was brought in, and the Eagles decided to go with Jalen Hurts for the future, and they traded Carson Wentz to the Indianapolis Colts to reunite him with his former OC, Frank Reich. Firstly, it looked pretty good. I mean, Carson Wentz did his thing. He was kind of a game manager, but at times when the Colts needed to, he delivered. But with a win and in situation against the lowly Jacksonville Jaguars, where they fired Urban Meyer earlier that season and Trevor Lawrence was struggling to really make his mark in the league, well, Carson had a god-awful performance and turned over the ball several times as the Colts were eliminated from playoff contention, and that was the final straw. As the Colts gave up on Wentz, he was traded to the Commanders, where he didn't have a successful campaign there, and then was later relegated to a backup position with the Rams and later the Kansas City Chiefs in 2024. But looking back at this trade, the Eagles got so much back for Carson Wentz. The Eagles in 2021, they traded Carson Wentz, ate a dead cap, and got a third-round pick in 2021 and a Colts future second-round pick in 2022, which could turn into a future first-round pick depending on the snap count. And Carson met that snap count in 2021, which meant the Eagles got an extra first-round pick. In the 2021 NFL Draft, the Eagles used that third-round pick to pair that with their own first to move up in the draft in a trade with the Dallas Cowboys to get Devontae Smith. In 2022, with various moves that Howie Roseman made, they eventually had 3 first-round picks. And as one of those picks they made with the Tennessee Titans, and that brought in A.J. Brown to the Philadelphia Eagles. And another move that was made was to bring in Jordan Davis, a standout defensive tackle for the defending champion Georgia Bulldogs in 2022. Now, one of these trades in the 2022 draft meant that they got an extra first-round pick in 2023 with the New Orleans Saints. And the Eagles went to the Super Bowl in 2022. The Eagles used that pick with the New Orleans Saints to move up with the Chicago Bears to draft future standout defensive tackle Jalen Carter, also from the Georgia Bulldogs. The final part of this trade was, again, going back to their trade with the New Orleans Saints. One of those second-round picks was used in a move in the 2024 draft to move up in the draft to trade with the Washington Commanders and snag Cooper DeJean. So if you look at this entire return on this Carson Wentz trade, they got A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Jalen Carter, and Cooper DeJean, all major contributors to the Super Bowl run in 2024 for Super Bowl 59. And at the time, I was a huge Carson Wentz fan. I thought he was the quarterback of the future, and I really questioned why the Eagles would eat a dead cap number so high just to get rid of their future franchise quarterback. And for Wentz, I was so wrong about Carson. I think that I really overlooked Jalen Hurts at the time. And since then, this move has paid big dividends in not only surrounding Jalen Hurts with so much talent, but also building 2 Super Bowl rosters and eventually a Super Bowl championship roster in Super Bowl 59. And now Wentz has now seen 2 of his backup quarterbacks win the Super Bowl and Super Bowl MVP with him on the bench. Howie Roseman just sent himself to the Hall of Fame, building his 3rd Super Bowl team, his 2nd championship across 2 entirely different rosters, and building this dominant team wasn't made overnight because Howie, as we know, focused on the trenches. And Typically, he doesn't dole out a ton of money to running backs, but last offseason he did something different. He recognized Saquon Barkley was a free agent and offered him a bargain deal, 3 years, $38 million, and lured him away from the rival New York Giants. And in this move, he created an unstoppable combination between the league's greatest offensive line without the greatest running back. And this turned into a 2,000-yard season and Saquon Barkley winning Offensive Player of the Year. But let's also look back at the other moves Howie Roseman made in this 2024 offseason. He extended A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith after those two were up for contract extensions, and he did this before the wide receiving market ballooned. And I'm talking about the major dollars that CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Ayuk made with their contract extensions, which led to actually them being part of major contract holdouts in training camp. He brought back his special teams unit, extending Rick Lovato, the long snapper, punter Braden Mann, and extending Jake Elliott as well. Next, how we focus on the defensive side. And bringing in Vic Fangio from the Miami Dolphins was a great move, as he transformed the defense and also brought on some great free agent signings, like bringing back C.J. Gardner-Johnson, the safety, and future first-team All-Pro linebacker Zach Vaughn. And Zach Vaughn, I think, was the really underrated signing, because at the time, they just signed him as a special teamer, seemed like, and he didn't have that big of a role with New Orleans. Well, Vic Fangio found something with Zach Vaughn and just transformed him into the sideline linebacker. And I think that this was such a bargain deal at the time, and the amount of production you get for such a quiet, low-key kind of deal was just amazing to see. Later in the draft, he went in with Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean with his first two picks, as he was part of revamping this secondary that was much maligned in 2023. Howie Roseman has built two championship rosters, both denying dynasties in the Patriots and Kansas City Chiefs. And it's easy for me to say that he is absolutely a Hall of Famer after this win. Nick Siranni was part of the head coaching carousel in 2021 and didn't have the best first impression, where he would look nervous and didn't seem like he was really ready for that first interview. But after a 2-5 start in his debut season with the Eagles, he has gone 46-15, including a 6-3 record, 2 Super Bowl appearances, and now winning one in Super Bowl 59. After last year's collapse, many, including myself, wondered if he would be back because, well, he didn't have the best play caller available and the defense was a mess. But after retooling the coaching staff and taking on more of a CEO role, well, Nick Sirianni as head coach has recovered with the Eagles after a 2-2 start and put up a dominant string of wins en route to the Super Bowl. He pressed all the right buttons this year to lead his squad back to a Super Bowl after his guys had routinely backed him up. And it took some humility, I think, because the 2023 season was a nightmare. He also listened to his players. He always does. After the 2-2 start, they really wanted to emphasize to being a running team. And he listened. And look at what it's translated since. Saquon Barkley put up 2,000 yards rushing the year. He is the first Eagles coach to go to multiple Super Bowls and now owns a Super Bowl trophy, beating Andy Reid head-to-head. Saquon Barkley didn't have the greatest Super Bowl 59 stat line, but still did an amazing job being essentially a decoy and also just being a pass catcher. But this doesn't take away from his amazing season. The Giants let him walk. He went on a revenge tour to remember. He ran for over 2,000 yards rushing, becoming the 9th member of the 2,000-yard rushing group, and later set the all-time rushing yard total when you include postseason games. He could have broken Eric Dickerson's record in Week 18, but sacrificed the record for the betterment of the team, as he knew that if he were to go out for that record, he could put not only himself, but his entire offensive line at risk. That's really nice to see that a guy could be so selfless when a record and personal gain was up for grabs, but he said, nah, there's a bigger prize at stake. That proved big dividends as he was totally fresh to go for the postseason, and he set a postseason record for most rushing yards in a single postseason. If you look at all the postseason performances, each of them except the Super Bowl went for over 100 yards on the ground. And this was just a magical year for Saquon Barkley. He won Offensive Player of the Year, could have even won MVP, but a truly selfless player, team first kind of guy. And I have to say that with this season being probably the best season I've ever seen by a running back, you gotta wonder about Giants owner John Mara, because I don't know if he's gotten any sleep. And this could be the greatest fumble of the century and will be a reoccurring nightmare for Giants fans for many seasons to come. Are the 2024 Eagles one of these all-time great teams? Because if you look at it, they had a 2,000-yard rusher, the league's #1 defense, while being the youngest defense in terms of average age. And they totally dominated in the postseason, especially. If Saquon Barkley didn't kneel down against the Packers, they could have had 3 wins of over 17 points plus. And this includes a 55-23 blowout of the Washington Commanders in the NFC Championship game and a 40-22 dismantling of the 2-time defending champion Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl. In this postseason run, they only trailed for 5 minutes and 43 seconds and never trailed in the second, third, and fourth quarters of a single game. This entire season, they went 18-3 and scored a playoff record 145 points. To finish the season 16-1 after a 2-2 start, and that one loss was only because Jalen Hurts was concussed early in the game against the Washington Commanders. But this has been such a dominant run that I have to really think that this Eagles team in 2024 winning Super Bowl 59 has to be up there with one of the best teams ever in NFL history. What a dominant season, what a team, and fly, Eagles fly. So that's it for this episode of Spectator Sports. Thank you everybody for tuning in for the Super Bowl 59 recap. If you want to help Spectator Sports grow, reach a broader audience, we're going to need your help. Remember, we are on the grind to 300 subscribers by the end of the NBA Finals in June. So if you could do us a massive favor to drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. If you want to get clips from today's episode, we got that for you here on YouTube in our various playlists, as well as on TikTok for now. And if you want to enjoy Spectator Sports from an audio perspective, we got that for you on Spotify. I'll link everything in the description. Shout out to Joey for editing this podcast, and I'll catch you all on the next one. Take care, everybody.